7 to 38. Many years saw an annual total above 40 feet. The snow here is a very wet, heavy snow, making removal difficult. In spite of the snow and all the problems with keeping equipment working in frozen conditions, the trains were rarely out of operation. Miles of heavy wooden snow sheds were built to help keep the snowfall and snow slides off the tracks. The tunnels and sheds were responsible for the design of the SP's cab-forward series of steam engines. These placed the crew well ahead of the stack in the back of the locomotive. Crews had an unobstructed view of the track ahead, unlike all other steam locomotives. Cut in near the end of this eastbound train is a cab forward smoking it up. A few cars separate the caboose from the worst of the heat and smoke. This 1942-built Alco S2 was an example of early diesel switcher purchases that would become a flood of diesel road locomotives by the end of World War II. As a result, this steam cab forward will be replaced along with all steam on the system by 1958. "770F units were eventually owned by the SP and all its subsidiary lines. These units help replace steam and establish the electromotive division of General Motors as the market leader for many years. Let's work west from Sparks, Nevada, passing Reno and following the Truckee River upstream toward the town of Truckee. The two tracks often run some distance apart in sections as we go along. It's remarkable that the double tracking was ever finished at all. It began when the Union Pacific's Edward Harriman bought the SP. His idea was to permanently join the SP and UP for a unified transcontinental line. The double tracking was by Harriman's order, and William Hood engineered it. By 1908, the federal court sought to break up the combined UP-SP systems. Harriman had declining health and he died by 1909. By 1913, the federal court ordered the UP-SP breakup. The SP was a separate property again. In 1914, another federal suit attempted to strip the remaining SP of the original Central Pacific line. Eventually, that suit was dropped. But this climate of uncertainty lasted nearly 10 years. All the while, traffic climbed, trains needed faster schedules, and World War I brought new priorities for traffic. Truckee was an important railroad town with a yard, a 22-stall roundhouse, turntable, and all the shops to keep locomotives ready for service. After 1955, the diesel was in charge of the Donner Line. Steam power was moved to other locations to last a few more years. Now those solid blocks of refrigerator cars were powered by General Motors F units. Leaving Truckee and heading for the summit, we encounter a pleasant amount of snow as we watch the track from the rear of the train. The wooden snow sheds totaled nearly 23 miles for both tracks at one time. The sheds were unpopular with the traveling public as they obscured one of the most beautiful views in the West. They were constantly catching on fire, especially in the summer when they were only a liability to the system. As time went on, the sheds were converted to concrete or eliminated altogether in sections. When the original Central Pacific line was being built, the problems with snow were underestimated. It would be about 20 years before effective and safe snow removal equipment could replace armies of men with basic shovels. These heavy timbered sheds could withstand up to 25-foot deep snow loads. The snow here was very wet and uniquely heavy snow nicknamed Sierra Cement. Over the years, the sheds were gradually eliminated. At first, they were removed in more open sections that weren't subject to slides. These areas could be managed with rotary plows, spreaders, and flangers. Some of the shortest sections of sheds were built to cover crossover switches. Occasional storms could overwhelm all efforts to keep things running. In 1952, the City of San Francisco passenger train hit a snowslide at this exact spot. The passengers and crew were trapped for 72 hours. In good weather, views of the more modern diesels make the trip over Donner seem very pleasant, but we should all remember the hardy men that made these trips in spite of winter's worst offerings in the steam days. Half-frozen brakemen routinely walk the car tops to set up the brakes of cars on moving trains. Diesels with dynamic braking systems ended that practice. The cab forwards had certainly helped the front crew breathe easier in tunnels and sheds, but that advantage didn't belong to a second locomotive crew or the caboose at the end. The crude respirators used in long tunnels wouldn't be acceptable by any modern standard for health and safety. The long refrigerator car trains were the result of a UP and SP partnership to haul fresh produce and other perishables out of California to eastern markets. This partnership was the 1906 founded Pacific Fruit Express Company. The long blocks of orange PFE cars ran for decades over Donner. The forming of PFE came out of Edward Harriman's short-lived combining of the SP and UP. As time ran out for the cab forwards and all steam, a few fan trips gave rail fans a last look. This doubleheader is at Likely Loop on the Modoc line that hadn't seen passenger service since the 30s. Once the Sacramento to Sparks run was ruled by cab forwards, no other steam design was as suitable for the duty. Only the diesel could change that. The Korean War brought out the troop cars again. SP had gained another traffic boost, pulling in cars from other roads to keep up. This period during the early 50s was the big push to dieselize, but steam was still needed to keep up with traffic demands. This wonderful scene along the Sacramento River in Dunsmuir, California, portrays a steam-powered freight on the Shasta line drifting down grade with a westbound moving compass south. Trains from the north here were referred to as westbound trains. On SP's north-south route on the Shasta line at Dunsmuir, California, the full roundhouse shows that steam is still in charge. The large turntable was upgraded in 1939, and it lasted to the present. Dunsmuir was a CTC control point of the Shasta division at one time. Diesels reduced the importance of Dunsmuir and so many other waypoint locations like it on the system. Diesels could pass through with not much more than a refueling. Helpers were based here even after steam's fall. The grade becomes steeper for eastbound traffic heading compass north. That hasn't changed, but the extra work to keep steam power ready was eliminated, and with it, many jobs in Dunsmuir. The regional yard switching dried up in Dunsmuir, and those jobs with it. Dunsmuir is in the northernmost part of California, just south of Mount Shasta. The town of Dunsmuir held the annual Railroad Days celebration that acknowledged the town's value to the railroad and the railroad's value to town employment. Dunsmuir was truly a railroad town that grew up with the modern railroad dating from 1886. Today's Dunsmuir is just as picturesque, and it serves the modern railroad and tourism. The sign on this 1953 float shows the payroll brought to town with all those steam-era jobs that would dry up in a few more years. The Dunsmuir station chalkboard shows passenger schedules from the steam days that brought people to the celebrated best water on Earth. The tracks went by the old resort at nearby Shasta Springs. The earliest diesels on freight power were in the Black Widow colors of basic black with silver fronts, not unlike the steam they replaced, but also with a few tasteful stripes of orange and red. By the early 60s, these SD9 diesels had erased all traces of steam. The Black Widow paint on these diesels is showing the wear of time, and the 1960 introduced gray and scarlet colors were being phased in. These colors would serve SP power until the very end. The most glamorous SP passenger diesels carried colors inherited from the steam-era Daylight trains. This Shasta Daylight is behind a set of Alco PA series diesels that were the standard power on many SP passenger trains that climbed mountainous territories. This beautiful train thrilled passengers with a Portland, Oregon to Oakland, California ride. One of the highlights was passing by the snow-capped Mount Shasta. The city of San Francisco, that originated on rails in Oakland, California, was one of the premier trains to pause at Sacramento's large SP station. The station was always busy with baggage, railway express packages, and U.S. mail. Unlike airports, all the costs of maintaining and operating a facility like this fell on the shoulders of the railroad, a disadvantage compared to the airlines. This is another Alco PA-powered train. Alco had many problems with their locomotives in the early years of turbocharging, but SP still trusted their finest trains to Alco power in the mountains. This train uses SP rails over Donner Pass out to Ogden, Utah. From there, the Union Pacific carried the train to its connections into Chicago. This train was jointly owned by the UP, explaining the yellow and gray passenger car colors. If it rolled on wheels, the shops here could rebuild it. The shops had a long history of not only heavy maintenance, but also building and upgrading entire classes of steam locomotives and freight cars. Even into the first and second generation of diesels, the Sacramento shops were used to extend locomotive life with rebuilding campaigns. We'll move from Sacramento to Roseville, that was the location of the largest yard, started in 1906. It featured a total of 49 classification tracks in the retarder-controlled Hump yard at the time of this filming in 1952. Cars were shoved over a ramp and routed by remote control to the appropriate receiving track. By 1952, it was rebuilt and dedicated as the Jennings Yard, named after Sacramento Division Superintendent M.L. Jennings. Retarder brakes squeezed wheel flanges so each car retained just enough kinetic energy to roll to the end of the waiting train being assembled on each selected track. This gravity-powered system is still used today in many hump yards. This system reduces the time to receive and reroute freight cars to different trains. Notice the vintage boxcar on the left still using a vertical brake staff. Here's an April 1956 scene of SP steam locomotive number 2521 on a fan trip over the old Kentucky House branch line. Number 2521 was a C9 Class 280 that shortly after this trip was retired to static display in Yuma, Arizona. The Kentucky House line ran from the main line junction at Lodi, California, compass east from Victor along to Wallace, Valley Spring, and finally Kentucky House in Calaveras County by following Highway 12. When steam was being phased out, the SP was very generous in its cooperation with rail enthusiasts to provide these last experiences. The commuter trains and freight locals were perfect assignments for steam locomotives that could be concentrated in one area for maintenance purposes. Steam from all over the SP came here to work out their last years.